Welcome to our webinar with Monash University Low FODMAP Certified. Welcome, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. We're going to be talking a little bit today about understanding the low FODMAP diet and how we can best manage symptoms to do with those. So my name is Lisa. I am from FODShop and I am one of the nutritionists / marketing manager there. And FODShop is a tummy-friendly food store where we provide foods that are part of the low FODMAP diet. So it just makes it your one-stop shop for that kind of thing. I'm really lucky to be joined today with the lovely Lyndall, and she's going to talk a little bit more with us about these kinds of things that we've just discussed. I'll just move on to this slide so you guys can see a little bit more about the both of us. Lyndall, would you like to introduce yourself and talk a little bit more about what you do?
Sure. So as you mentioned, my name's Lyndall, and I've been a research dietitian with the Monash FODMAP team for, I think, coming up 7 years now, so quite a long time. And I've worked in a variety of roles across the years with the team, doing a little bit with our app and our food certification program, developing our online courses for training dietitians and also educating patients as well. So I've done quite a few different roles within the team over the years, and really excited to be here today to share a little bit more with you about the diet.
Yeah, well, it's very great having you here. You guys are the gurus when it comes to the low FODMAP diet. So I'm very excited to see what you can teach us today. Okay, so our first question for you, Lyndall, is what are FODMAPs and how do they affect people with IBS?
Great place to start. Okay, so to give you a bit of an overview to start with, FODMAPs, when we talk about FODMAPs, we're talking about a collection of different sugars. So FODMAP is an acronym, as some people might already know, that stands for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. So it's a bit of a mouthful, but in summary, they're basically a collection of several different sugars that are found in a whole big variety of different foods naturally that occur in our diets. And these particular sugars we have found through research can have some effects on the gut, particularly in people with IBS. So the first thing that they can do is they can sort of act like little magnets to attract extra water into your gastrointestinal tract. And they also act as a food source for the bacteria or your gut microbiome that live in your large intestine as well. So these bacteria can sort of use these sugars, FODMAP sugars, as a source of energy, eat them up and produce some gas as a result of that process. So it's good to just recap on those two effects and the fact that they actually happen in all people, not just people with IBS. So FODMAPs are going to be having these effects in the gut of everyone. But it appears that people with IBS or irritable bowel syndrome seem to have particularly sensitive guts overall. So there's something going on between the connection via the nervous system between the brain and our gut in people with IBS. Something goes a little bit haywire. We're not still 100% sure the exact cause behind it, but that communication is altered in some way. And also people with IBS seem to have particularly sensitive nerves that surround their gastrointestinal tract as well. So these sugars are going to have these two effects of pulling more water and helping with some gas production via your microbiome in everyone, but people with IBS, because of their more sensitive guts, and also some kind of miscommunication or altered communication between their gut and their brain, they sense these sort of normal processes as being painful and uncomfortable, and the signals can get a bit awry and send your intestines into overdrive or underdrive, leading to changes in bowel habits and things like constipation in some people, or diarrhea, or sensations of bloating and that abdominal sort of fullness in people with IBS. So that's a probably fairly long-winded description, but I think an important one as well to start with.
No, it's definitely interesting. And it's very interesting to me to know that, you know, we all go through the same thing, but how it can somehow affect other people and not other people. So it's a very interesting idea of visceral hypersensitivity.
Yes.
And I know that there's a lot more research going on about it now as well. So it's a growing
absolutely.
area.
Very, very popular area in the research field around that gut-brain communication in particular.
Definitely. Okay, well, we've spoken a little bit about FODMAPs now. Can you talk a little bit more about what the FODMAP diet is?
Yeah, of course. So in people with IBS, we often recommend the FODMAP diet as an approach to help manage their IBS symptoms. So what this diet involves really is 3 main steps. So it's something that we like to refer to now as a bit of a learning diet or a learning process. So in the first step of the diet, we encourage people to eat foods that contain these FODMAP sugars in low amounts for about 2 to 6 weeks, depending on how severe their symptoms are. And the intention of that first step is really to hopefully reduce their IBS symptoms down to a level where they're feeling much, much better and able to manage those symptoms really well. And then once they're feeling better, which is the ideal, they can then move on to step 2 of the diet, which we refer to usually as reintroduction, which is where you go through a process of using food challenges and reintroducing different high FODMAP foods back into your diet, kind of quite strategically, to see how you tolerate those particular types of FODMAP sugars, and determine, I guess, where your level of tolerance to each of those sugars is. And then step 3, once we've sort of done all of those food challenges, based on the results that you get, you then use that information, hopefully with the assistance of a dietitian, ideally, someone who can support you through this whole diet process, to then personalize your diet based on what you've learned throughout the whole journey. So you can then reintroduce some higher FODMAP foods back into your diet that you tolerated quite well in that second step, and then only really limit the foods or the types of FODMAPs that you are particularly sensitive to in your individual case. So it's important to remember that everyone seems to have quite individual responses to different FODMAP sugars, and it's not a one-size-fits-all diet. So it's really important to not just, take advice from someone as to what's worked for them, because that may not work for you. You may have slightly different levels of tolerance to different FODMAPs. So it's important to work as much as you can on a personal level, and a dietitian is the best sort of person that can help support you to do that.
Definitely. I know there's a lot of misleading information online as well, and I've seen some research that the more likely the diet is to work is when you're seeing a dietitian at the same time.
Yes.
Bumps up the percentage of it actually being effective by heaps.
Yeah,
so it's definitely an important thing to get help if you need it.
It dramatically does increase the success rate, and like you said, we've seen that in research. The diet was initially designed to be delivered by a dietitian, so it's always been that way. And there can be a lot of misleading information out there, so it's good to get your advice and support, ideally from a dietitian that's well trained in this area as well.
Definitely. Okay, so apart from the diet itself, what are some other ways that you can manage IBS symptoms?
Yeah, so like anything, there's always multiple ways to manage particular conditions, and diet in this case is just one of them. So we know from research that the low FODMAP diet seems to work in about 3 out of 4 people that try it. So it's a pretty good success rate, but then you do have, that 1 out of 4 people that it doesn't seem to be effective for whatever reason. And that really might come down to maybe what else is going on for the person in the background, what else could be triggering symptoms other than their diet. So going back to that very first diagram that we discussed on the what is what a FODMAPs page around that gut-brain connection. That's a really important aspect sometimes, or in a lot of cases for people when they're trying to treat their IBS symptoms, is actually targeting what might be going on between that gut-brain connection. So that's where psychological therapies can be really, really helpful. So we know that things like stress and anxiety can really affect your gastrointestinal function because you've got that connection between your brain and what's going on for you psychologically, emotionally, can communicate directly to your gut and then change the way that it's functioning and working. So there's a really, really strong two-way communication between the gut and the brain. So if we do have high levels of, underlying stress or anxiety or depression, anything like that, that can also be playing a role in what's going on with your gut symptoms. So addressing that through psychological based therapies like mindfulness, meditation, cognitive behavioral therapy. That's one normally delivered by psychologists specifically. And then there's a really cool sort of newer therapy around now called gut-directed hypnotherapy, which sounds a bit full on, but it's actually really well researched, this particular type of therapy. And what it does is it really specifically targets that gut-brain communication to try and, I guess, calm down the messages that might be being communicated between the gut and the brain in an overactive way or an exaggerated way, and just tries to focus on normalizing that communication. So it's, again, another really effective form of therapy that works really well in a lot of people and doesn't involve them having to change their diet. So if you are that person that has that particularly high, underlying stress or anxiety level, something like gut-directed hypnotherapy could be a really great place to start as well, especially if you've already done some things with diet. Then I guess just going back to common sense as well in terms of general health and making sure that you're, eating regular meals, having enough dietary fiber, enough water, enough variety in your diet. Exercise is another really important one for a lot of people. It does help stimulate the gut and normalize its function as well. So if we're not exercising enough, there could be a role to play there. And then we have, I guess, the medication side of things. There are some medications that have a little bit of evidence to help with people with certain IBS symptoms. So that might depend on what your predominant IBS symptoms are, depending on what kind of medication could be right for you, and your GP or gastroenterologist can be really helpful there. And then we've also got, your dietary supplements as well. So things like fiber supplements sometimes can be quite helpful if you're struggling to get enough fiber in your diet alone. And then there's a little bit of evidence for things like specific types of probiotics. That evidence, I guess, needs to be interpreted quite specifically because there are specific strains of these probiotic bacteria that have been studied in people with IBS. So it's not just a general blanket rule of, probiotics might help, go pick whatever one off the shelf in the chemist, because they all do slightly different things. So again, get some good advice from your health professional over what specific types of these products might be better for your IBS. And yeah, peppermint oil is another one that some people find helpful, some people don't, but it's quite a natural remedy that sometimes is worth a shot to see if it works for you or not. But yeah, just, I guess, with all of these things, remembering to get advice from a health professional ideally first before you try them, because depending on your particular situation, your particular symptom profile, some of these therapies might be more helpful or less helpful for you. So getting that personalized advice is really important.
Yeah, definitely. I 100% agree with that. And give me some examples of some high and low FODMAP foods.
Yeah, so this is a tricky one because to just give a list. And this is probably partly why Monash, and I think we get to it a bit later, created our low FODMAP diet app, because FODMAPs are something that are found in a really wide variety of foods, and it actually is going to depend on how much you eat of those particular foods as to whether or not that quantity becomes high in FODMAPs or moderate or even low. So there's not necessarily blanket rules for most foods to say this is a high FODMAP food and this is a low FODMAP food. We really need to narrow it down to the portion size or the amount that you're eating in that sitting as well. So being quite specific. But in general, there are some foods that are quite highly concentrated sources of FODMAPs. And I've listed a couple here, things like onion, garlic, watermelon, apples and pears, and your wheat and rye-based products tend to be those really concentrated sources. So it's quite hard to find sort of low FODMAP quantities of those foods because they do just pack so many FODMAPs into such small quantities. And then you've got the opposite end of the spectrum, foods that really contain quite minimal amounts of FODMAPs. And some examples there are things like carrots and kale and blueberries and macadamia nuts. So these are foods that you can usually eat in more generous amounts, and you're not going to have to worry too much about them becoming higher in FODMAPs as you eat larger quantities. So yeah, it's really comes back down to that, remembering the importance of serving size or the amount you actually eat in one sitting. And that a lot of high FODMAP foods can be low FODMAP when we eat them in smaller amounts. So that's where the app can be really, really helpful to guide you as to what those sort of smaller amounts are that might be completely fine for you to eat of some of those traditional high FODMAP foods.
Definitely. And what do you think, to put you on the spot, what do you think about FODMAP stacking?
FODMAP stacking, that is a complex one for sure. So that, just to give everyone a really quick idea of what we're referring to with FODMAP stacking, it's where you're eating foods in their sort of low FODMAP serving sizes, but together. So we're sort of getting this kind of, I guess, cumulative effect of multiple different foods and the small amounts of FODMAPs that they have together. The good thing to know there is that the Monash FODMAP app has actually been designed in such a way that we've sort of allowed for that stacking to occur and not reach the sort of threshold where we would then consider the meal to be high FODMAP overall. So the cutoffs used in the app are quite conservative in that way to allow people to, say have a low FODMAP serving of, just trying to think of something, carrot plus a low FODMAP serving of lettuce plus a low FODMAP serving of cucumber, etc., in a salad, and overall that salad is still going to remain low in FODMAPs as long as you're sticking to the sort of low FODMAP or green serving sizes listed of those individual foods. So we do take that into account. But that being said, some people do find that their IBS symptoms are much more sensitive than others. So as much as we've tried to take into account, the potential most sensitive person that might be out there, there are still those people at, different ends of the spectrum of sensitivity. So if you feel like stacking might be an issue for you, that's where a dietitian again can come in with their sort of detective magnifying glass and sort of have a look at your diet as a whole and what you might be eating in particular meals and see, okay, for you, stacking might be occurring in these places, and how then you can modify what you're doing to reduce the impact of that.
Definitely. That's really interesting. Thank you for answering my question.
That's all right.
In terms of those high and low FODMAP foods you were talking about, do you want to talk a little bit more about the app and how that can help people?
Yeah, so in the Monash FODMAP app, we have a food guide section, which basically goes through hundreds and hundreds of different foods that have been tested in the lab for their FODMAP content. And it then classifies each food as sort of low, moderate, or high in FODMAPs in particular amounts, using a traffic light system to sort of break it up for you. So I've got avocado circled there as an example, but I might go down to something like blueberries, for example. You can see down a bit further that have a red, amber, and green serving listed as well. as being rated red overall. So it's good to just sort of clarify, I guess, how the traffic light system works as well in the app. So these big traffic lights here, they refer to the rating of the food in a typical, what we might consider a typical serving size amount of those foods. So for something like blueberries or fruits or vegetables, we typically use the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating as a reference to what a standard serving size of each of those foods is. And then we work from there. So we'd work out what the FODMAP rating is in that standard serving size. And in this case, it's come out as high. So we say, in a standard serve of blueberries, it's typically you're going to get a high amount of FODMAPs. However, if you then reduced that serving size to, I'm trying to read what it says. I can't actually read the numbers. They're a little bit blurry, but whatever that says there, that second serve, if you reduce it down to that amount, it then becomes moderate in FODMAPs. And then if we reduce it even further to, I think that says 40 grams, that then becomes low in FODMAPs. So it's not that blueberries as a whole are, bad or high FODMAP and we need to completely avoid them. It's just that we need to be mindful of the amount that we eat. So, 125 grams of blueberries is going to be too much if you're following the first step of the diet. But 40 grams, a little handful on your cereal in the morning is probably going to be absolutely fine. So that's where that importance of serving size comes in and being really specific about the amounts that you're eating of these foods.
Definitely. Yeah. And how do you use the app?
This is a really, really good question, because the app actually has so many features, and a lot of people don't know about all of the features. And I feel like we could have an entire webinar just on going through the app and discovering all the different features. But just to give you a sort of general quick overview. So firstly, we have the food guide, which, like I referred to before, contains that FODMAP information for hundreds and hundreds of foods that have been tested. We're probably up to thousands of foods now. So here I've lost count of how many are in there. There's a lot. All of the foods that have been tested for their FODMAP content in the lab, and all of that detailed information about the different serving size amounts that you can eat on different steps of the diet, I guess, depending on where you're at. We then move over to the certified section. So this is another really important section where you can see all of the brands that have been actually tested or had their particular products tested for FODMAPs and have been certified by Monash to say that their products or their recipe in its, one serve, one portion amount is low in FODMAPs. So this is really helpful for identifying, specific brands, say when you're in the cereal aisle, which specific brands have been tested and do we know have been given that stamp of approval to say they're low in FODMAPs. And this is where FODShop's fantastic, because you guys stock a lot of these certified brands at FODShop. So it's really easy for people to go onto your website and see exactly, which products have that Monash FODMAP stamp of approval, and they know are going to be suitable for them to have on that first low FODMAP step of the diet. So yeah, that's where FODShop's fantastic there. In our certification sort of section. We then also have the Find a Dietitian button, which is fantastic to mention quickly as well, for linking you with local dietitians that have done Monash's comprehensive dietitian training program. So you know that they're going to have all of the latest up-to-date information and training around the FODMAP diet and how it should be implemented, and how they can support people out there following the diet to get the best results, essentially. So you can find a list of dietitians there via country, via state, depending on whereabouts you live. And there's, again, I've lost count how many countries now. There's quite a lot of countries that we've now trained dietitians in. So you might be surprised thinking, oh, I live in Greece. surely there's no dietitians in Greece that can support me. But you'll be surprised there are Greek dietitians that have done our training, for example. So have a look there to see if you can locate a local dietitian. And also just remembering a lot of dietitians work virtually now as well. And that's one of the bonuses of COVID. So you may be able to not necessarily find a dietitian in your country, but another dietitian somewhere else that's done our training and works virtually and can offer that support via Zoom or similar. The recipe section of the app, pretty self-explanatory, but it contains a collection of low FODMAP recipes, which is fantastic, particularly when you're in that first step of the diet and feeling a little bit lost as to what you can eat. That can be a really good starting point. The booklet. So a lot of people don't realize that this is actually, I don't know if you've ever seen it, Lisa, but our hard copy diet booklet that we sell, this is actually an electronic version of that that's found in the app. So it has lots and lots of information about the diet, about IBS in general, all sorts of stuff, all of the sort of background that you might want to know around the low FODMAP diet, low FODMAP shopping lists. What do I do when I want to eat out at restaurants? It has guides to all that kind of stuff in that booklet section. So really, really handy to go through and read that, especially if you're just starting out, because there's lots of great background information that will really get you into the sort of headspace of what we're doing with following the diet. And then also there's the diary function, last but not least there, which is really, really helpful, particularly in step 2 of the diet when we're starting to reintroduce some of those higher FODMAP foods. You can actually find a reintroduction guide in this diary section. So it will guide you through the different FODMAP groups and which foods you can use as those challenge foods. And it even suggests quantities that you can use and how to complete those challenges. So really, really helpful information found in there. Again, that a lot of people don't realize is actually there. Because at the end of the day, we want you to be able to successfully go through all 3 steps of the diet, not just stay on the first step. That's a bit of a misconception from the past, that this is a forever diet, that we want you to avoid FODMAPs forever. Absolutely not. It's very much about individualizing your diet in the longer term to get some of those higher FODMAP foods back in. And just to really quickly mention, if you are just starting out on the diet and have just downloaded the app and don't know where to start, clicking that start the diet button at the top there, again, fairly self-explanatory, but really, really helpful. It takes you through some sort of tutorials around the app and how to use it as well. So it's a really, really good starting point.
Yeah, well, there you go. I even learned some new things today. That booklet function is really helpful. I didn't realize that was a little information book. I think that will be really useful for a lot of people to know as well.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that brings us to the end. Thank you so much for your time, Lyndall. I've really enjoyed listening to you, and I've definitely learned some new things as well. So I hope that everybody listening has also learned something. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact either Lyndall or myself, or just contact FODShop. We're happy to send any questions you might have through to Monash as well. So the best email address would be marketing or info@fodshopper.com.au. So yes, thank you again, Lyndall. It's been great. And I might wrap it up there.
Yeah, wonderful.
Great. Thank you.